Meeting is being recorded. Okay, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Let me introduce myself so you know a little bit about me. My name is Lynn Legg. I'm a physical therapist by training. I've done that for a lot of years. I've worked in the school system for 39 years, recently retired, but I'm still working for Oakland County Intermediate School District and providing services for a local district as well for early intervention. My background in pediatrics is extensive. I worked in a school program for early intervention first, and then moved into a different program for children that had physical disabilities and health conditions. And I was in that program for many years. And part of that program, I had a classroom of my own. And in that classroom space was the adapted bathroom for those children to use the bathroom during the course of their school day. And since it was in my room, I somehow got the little crown of being the queen of toilet training from that proximity in my space. So that's a little bit my background there. I most recently have worked in early intervention, so birth to 3 population for the last over 20 years, and including kids that have physical disabilities. That's what I work with. And I've been doing this workshop on toilet training or something similar all that time as well. I have to say that when I worked with the children that had the physical disabilities, I went to a workshop to learn more about toilet training children that had the special needs. And I'll share some information about that tonight because that's going to be a piece of this presentation as well. So I think we're ready to get started if you guys are ready to listen. I do have a tendency to talk fast. I'm going to try very hard not to, but I know I can speak very quickly, and people around me say you're very passionate. So the more passionate I feel, the quicker I talk. So I'm going to try very hard not to do that tonight. I also am going to say that my captions are reading, and I've learned from doing another presentation where the captions were on that sometimes it misinterprets what I'm saying, and some bad words have shown before. And it's not that I'm saying bad words, but just heads up to you and anyone listening. Be wary if it says things on the captions that I did not say. So let's go into what we're going to do tonight. It's trouble with toilet training. I'm going to talk a little bit about readiness skills because that's something that's kind of critical to know for anyone toilet training. Have some special considerations to be aware of. A couple helpful hints that I have for you. Talking about special needs children or special situations, and some strategies to work with those as well. And then some questions at the very end when we're done recording. So Mayo Clinic has a great quote that I love whenever I do this presentation because potty training success hinges on the physical, developmental, and behavioral milestones, not age. Because age is just a number and it doesn't dictate when children need to be toilet trained, whether you are typically developing or if you have a child that has delays or other conditions. So age is purely a number. I like that because it's so very true for a lot of things. So a couple of facts to share with you. Research way back when, kids, like they actually started research in 1890. I had a study that I found that showed that kids at that time frame started toilet training at the age of 1, if not sooner, and they were fully trained before 2. And some of that was because of the need at the time. Didn't have washing machines, you didn't have diapers that were disposable, you had cloth diapers, and many families had large numbers of children. So you had a need to be out of diapers quickly. And so that's what happened then. Over time, the toilet training process has gotten later. Some of it's the advent of the diapers that we use nowadays that are so much better maintaining and containing the liquids and BM that comes into a diaper. So now training starts anywhere between 18 months of age all the way up to 3 to start training for a typical child. We know from research that bowel control develops physiologically before bladder control, but it's not always the starting point for all kids. So we'll talk a tiny bit about that. And we also know from research and from practice that children that have some special needs, whether it's a developmental delay, a language delay, a physical issue, or other conditions, often don't even start toilet training until they're older than 3 years old. And those same children may take far longer to train and sometimes aren't trained until 5 years or even farther beyond that. We'll talk a little bit about that also today. So just a brief look at these readiness signs, because these are readily available, but there are emotional readiness signs and physical readiness signs that you need to be aware of. And we'll talk a little bit about how some of these things can be adapted. But this is what are expected for kids that are typically developing. One critical one is no bowel movements when they're sleeping, because if that happens when you're sleeping, it kind of tells you that they're not aware of their body. Urine happens, but the bowel movements, that's a big one. So that's a quick overview of readiness. However, for all children, despite whatever delay that you might have, if you have a language delay or a physical delay or a developmental disability or a physical condition, medical diagnosis of some sort, all kids look at the same readiness signs. And some of those pieces are, do they know the difference of being wet versus being dry? Do they know what that feels like? Can they be dry for a period of at least 2 hours at a time? And so for many kids at the young ages, that's when they take a nap. Can they wake up from a nap dry? And if they can, that's a good sign that they're able to hold on to that urine, keep it contained in their bladder, and not let it release while they're asleep. Now, they often do it right away when they wake up, but that's okay because they're holding it for about 2 hours. Can they sense the need to urinate or have a bowel movement? And you often see kids that will go and find a corner to hide in. They might tell, if they can talk, say, don't look at me. They have a way, in some way, of communicating that they know something's happening with their body. And it's often easier to feel and sense a bowel movement than it is for urination, although some kids will happen to, especially boys, will touch the front of their pants if they know something's happening, if they're aware of it. The other one is, can they get to the potty or toilet seat without help or with help if they need to? Are they physically capable of getting to and from? And then can they help with dressing and undressing? Because we know part of going to the bathroom is taking your pants down and then pulling them back up when you're done. Or are they ready to learn that process? They may not be independent with it, but are they in the process of learning that? And then the other is, do they show interest or are they motivated in some way to have an interest in toilet training? And it might be the interest is they follow you to the bathroom every time you go. And they're curious about what happens in the bathroom. But be wary. Some kids that are curious will play in the water. So also be cautious. But those are signs that are there no matter what a child's ability is when they're showing some of those readiness skills. So we want to look for those for every child. So things to consider. Does wetness feel wet? Diapers are so good that they don't feel wet anymore. Long ago, cloth diapers, and some people who use them now, you definitely feel wet when you have a wet diaper because they get cold too over time. But can your child understand wetness? I've had someone come to my workshop years ago for the regular basic class, and their child did not know what wet was. So they had to actually teach the child what wet was compared to dry. So when their pants got wet, they knew that that was what it meant because they did not understand that. And then the other one is, does your child notice that they have a wet or soiled diaper? Are they aware there's something there? Some kids don't care. And if they don't care, that's often a sign they're not ready. But if they tell you right after they've had a BM that they pooped or they indicate it in some way to you, then that's a good sign that they're showing some awareness of their body. How and can your child communicate to you? Does your child actually talk? Some kids can't, and that's okay. Are there other means of communication for your child? Are they able to gesture to you? Are they able to sign for you? Do you happen to use some other system of communication with your child? Having a means of communication is kind of important. We know we can read our kids, but we want them to be able to tell us things too. And then, do they need to have help with clothing? Some kids, based on their disability they might have or the delays they might have, they may not have the strength to put clothes up and down, but it doesn't mean they can't be toilet trained if they don't get help for that. So that's not a all or nothing kind of thing, but it's something to be aware of. Can they do the clothing? And then can they get on and off that potty by themselves? And I know for many kids, I prefer a little freestanding child-sized potty because that gives them more independence. They can sit down, they can sit in a comfortable position with their knees at 90 degrees, their hips at 90 degrees, and they can even bend over to have a BM when they're on a small potty. But you also have ways to use a big, large toilet for those same situations for children. We'll talk about that too. So those are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about toilet training, whatever the child's needs are. Then thinking about, do you do that free standalone potty? Do you use a little ring reducer or something on the top of your regular toilet to make them more comfortable? and safer to sit. If you do that, always use a step stool so they have a place to, number one, step up and get there, but also a place to rest their feet so they can be comfortable. We know that anyone who sits on a toilet has to feel comfortable enough to let the urine and BM pass. Otherwise, you can't relax enough to have it happen. So we need to have them be comfortable. And so those are two ways to be comfortable. I have found over the years that a trick with boys, if they're having a really hard time, sometimes sitting them facing backwards on a home toilet, and so they're facing the tank, that lets them get in a position that they have total support. Their hands can rest on the tank and they can lean forward, which gets them that nice position for a BM as well. But it also helps to angle their little penis downward so that they have a good direction for the urine to flow out and not go all over the floor. The downside of that is their clothes need to come off. So they can't really do that when they have clothes on. They have to take their pants totally off. But that's okay if you're at home. It doesn't necessarily work that way when you're in a public bathroom because many of them don't have tanks. And you probably don't want to take your children's clothes off when they're in the bathroom in a public place. But as a home environment, it is always an option that you can think about. So quick and easy access to a potty chair is a necessity. Sometimes they say to have one on both, like if you have two levels of your home, have an access to something on both levels. I've had some parents that put that little freestanding potty close to the living room or in the hallway outside the bathroom door, so they know where it's going to end up, but they have easy access. They know right where it is every moment and they can get there quickly, because we don't want to have a child having an accident on the way there because it's too far away. And then we also know that children who have autism do not do well with transitions. So it is recommended for kids with autism that you start using the regular toilet from day one. Now you may use adaptions on the toilet to make it safer, but it's what you want to do is not make a change in the toilet situation for that child because it's going to be difficult to transition. And let's set our kids up to be successful rather than causing another problem or a snag on the way of getting there. So the other thing to think about is all of us have body rhythms. I know I wake up in the morning, my first thing I do is use the restroom before I go anywhere else and turn on my coffee and get everything ready for the day. Kids are in the same mode eventually. They have their own rhythms. Sometimes we know what those rhythms are. Sometimes we don't. So we'll talk about that too. But for some kids, especially those kids that are older and some that have developmental disabilities, it's a good recommendation to use a time schedule and having those body rhythm breaks that you often see, waking up in the morning, sitting on the toilet then, before a nap or after a nap, after a meal, because we know when kids eat and if they drink liquids at a meal, about 20 minutes later, something is going to happen, whether it's urine or BM or both. So that's a nice time to get on the toilet. And then before bath or before bedtime, depending on whether they're both in the same instance or not, you do it then too, because that sets up a schedule in the day that their body starts to get used to that rhythm. And we want to do that for our kids. It's not necessarily true for all kids. Some kids, you follow their own rhythm, but this is one recommendation. So you do want to have some books that they can look at with you. And some sources say to have them in the bathrooms because we all kind of look at papers and read for a moment if we're going to sit for a moment in the bathroom. And that's not a bad thing to do with your little ones as well. So having a book maybe about potty training that they do while they're in the bathroom is good. Or even just having access to that topic of information. And they have lots of books on the market. There are books for girls, books for boys, because their anatomy is different. There are books that are interesting. Some are fun. There's also videos if you're okay letting your child watch a video. So there's lots of things that help them understand what the process is going to be if you look at those things and review them. Often it's recommended to use a reward system with your children. Now, the one thing about a reward system, it has to have some meaning to your child. It has to be a powerful thing for that child. So I know that not all children like a sticker. So if you're going to use a sticker chart for a child that doesn't care for stickers, it's not going to mean anything for them. But if you have a child that really, really, really likes a certain song, maybe that's your song that you do every time they have success in the bathroom. So think about what really charges your child up and use that as part of your reward system. So you can decide that as you know your child best. Then the other one is know your child's pattern of using the bathroom. So I have a method of finding that out if you're not sure. Sometimes I have to say over the years working with little ones, I've had kids that saw me at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, and every day at 9 o'clock they'd have a BM. Somehow I think I did it to them sometimes, but that was their pattern. It happened to be 9 o'clock every day. There are some kids that have no pattern, but if you don't know, you can easily use a charting method that is recommended to do for 2 weeks. You just record from the time they wake up till they go to bed every hour what happens in their diaper. You're not going to put them on a toilet. You're just going to check and see what is their diaper telling you. Is it dry? Is it wet? Is there a BM? Does it have BM and urine? And you just mark it on a chart for 2 weeks. I'm going to show you a mocked up chart. This chart is a pretend one for a child pretending. Look, the U means that there's urine. So most mornings, 7:30, even 8 o'clock, somewhere in that time frame, this child urinated. That's a good sign. That's a time I can put that child in the potty. Looks like 9:30 is almost always the BM time. That would be another time you could put a child on the toilet, and probably just before that, they might be successful and catch them doing a BM. And it's a starting point of them knowing that that's a time to go potty. You also see on this chart at 11:30, this child is almost always dry, but by 12:30, they're wet. So that window is when you would probably want to put them on the toilet again. So if you don't know what their pattern is, some kids are like clockwork, other kids are not. But this is a way to learn that pattern for your child. I know when I worked in the classroom program, we use this as a method to communicate between home and school. Doesn't have to happen for everyone. You don't have to do it for your own child. But if you're really not sure what their pattern is, this is an easy way to get an idea of it. I did learn in a workshop that I took years ago that if you do this kind of pattern, know that when kids start learning toilet training, sometimes they get erratic before they get smooth again. So don't be surprised if things get kind of crazy for a bit and then settle out. So we're going to talk a little bit about some special situations with kids. I'm going to go through all of these. It was some suggestions that I've learned or some things to be considered. So if you have children that have sensory processing difficulties, that can be a big concern for kids from their point of view with going to the bathroom. Many of them don't like to sit on the toilet for lots of reasons. Others don't understand what their body's doing. So interoception, the thing on the left here, is a sensation of your body. It's a part of sensory processing that your body understands needs of itself. So you know that you sense hunger. You might know that you are thirsty. You might know that you're tired, or you might know that your stomach is really full, or your bladder is really full, and you know that means you need to go to the bathroom. Not all of us and not all of our children have that sense established. So be aware, does your child even understand what those signals mean? And you may need to work with either someone that can specialize with that or help your child understand what those signals are in their body. And using words and talking with them and giving them sensations of that is a way to help that. The other piece of it is just the whole sensory part of our intake of information into our bodies. Can your child sense that wet and dryness? Is your child tolerant or intolerant of being wet or messy? Because if they are tolerant of it, maybe their sensory system is under responsive. If they're not tolerant, it's probably a good thing for toilet training, but it's kind of a challenging thing as a parent, because if they're not ready to toilet train, they don't like wet or messy diapers. It means a little bit more work on your part. Not a bad thing, but it's just more work, because it's all that sense of touch and that tactile. I've also seen kids with these issues with sensory that when they sit on a toilet, they might not be comfortable. It might be feeling too cold. It might not feel like the right size. It might be too hard sensation. So there are some things like using a ring reducer that has a soft seat that makes it more comfortable and maybe warmer than a nice cold bathroom. Like with this great winter weather we've had, bathrooms are pretty nippy right now. So if you have that awareness for your child, you can help them by having a ring reducer that might give them more comfort. One thing that I learned from a family, and this is a different version of it, but they used to be called a potty poncho, but now it's this little drape that you can actually dispose of, but it actually makes the comfort of the seat better. It makes the ring smaller, so it's like having a ring reducer, but it protects it from being dirty. And I had a little boy that was 4 years old. He was having a real challenge with being toilet trained, and we were working hard to help him be toilet trained, and it just was not working. He was afraid of the toilet, and Mom found the potty poncho And when we started using that, all of a sudden it was like someone flipped a switch, and he was so much more comfortable sitting that he let himself go to the bathroom, and he got trained within about a month. So he knew what he needed to do, but he was so afraid that he couldn't let himself do it. So sometimes something as simple as this makes a difference for some kids. So this is just one thing. So the next piece that we need to consider for kids is, can they communicate to us? And there are kids that communicate in numerous ways. So many kids have good verbal skills, and that's always nice that they can say either after the fact or before the fact eventually that they either have gone or need to go. And we know that's at the end of toilet training. That's not the beginning, but that's something that we hope to be there near the end. We also know that some kids are not able to verbally talk. They use other means of communication. They might use gesturing, they might use signing, and the sign for toileting is the T. That's the ASL sign for toilet. So if your child is not verbal, doesn't have verbal output, but can use some other means of communication, that helps you know what they need, and you can work together to do that. So it doesn't mean you can't toilet train a child if they can't talk. The other thing you can use are picture cues or a visual schedule. And I'm going to show you a picture of a visual schedule. This is one available on the market. You can buy it. And it has just the kind of the parts of going to the bathroom. And it can actually be put in order. So you do it in this order, like a sequence, or you can use a single one that identifies it's time to go to the bathroom. And that's what a picture cue would do. Oh, I couldn't find a picture of just a picture cue. So this is why I have this little visual schedule that's on the market. And it shows you the steps of going to the bathroom. For some kids, that visual is helpful. And it gives them communication. They might give you the card. They might point to the card. It might be scheduled in their day that at 12 o'clock after they've had lunch, it's toilet time. So you have that on the schedule. So this is helpful for kids that have difficulty with communication, and it gives them a means to communicate and understand the process. There's one more that I found in the market again, and the pictures are a little bit older looking. And these look like boy. I know there's some that are boy, gender girl. There's different ones available. But that's something that's on the market, or you can make yourself with pictures to help your child be able to communicate if they can't talk. So it doesn't mean you can't toilet train if they can't talk. Then the next one, this is like a hot topic, the strong-willed child or the resistant child. And I've talked over the years numerous times about children that are strong-willed and are resistant to toilet training. They might be the ones who really dig their heels in. And I'll talk a second about some of the things you'll see. But there is a difference between having a medical cause for this resistance versus not. And oftentimes what you see, if there's a medical problem creating the difficulty of toilet training, it might be that the child that has pain when they urinate or when they defecate. And if you have pain, you're not going to want to reproduce that. And that might need something to be addressed from a medical point of view. If your child laughs or runs and they dribble or wet during those moments, that means they don't have great control of that sphincter. And there might be something medically going on with that. Or if you find that their underwear they're wearing tend to be damp a lot, like they're dribbling and losing urine, that might mean there's something going on that's strength-wise with the sphincter or maybe even the pelvic floor that they might need help with. And so that might be something that needs a medical management. Or if they have chronic diarrhea or constipation, and constipation is a big one for kids who are resistant or strong-willed, because that is one that will stop things in its tracks. So we'll talk about that in 1 second. What you will see in a child that's very resistant or strong-willed when they don't want to go toileting, if you don't have one at home, this is what you will see. They're the ones that will actually refuse to sit on the toilet, or if they sit for a minute and get right back up. They won't stay there. They won't let anything happen. They also often are the kids who will hold their urine or BM all day long and then choose when to go when they have a diaper on. Those are the kids that they're putting up a little power struggle, and they're controlling with ultimate control, but not doing it in the way that you would like them to do it. So one thing that happens with those kids, if you put too much pressure, if you lecture them too much, if you remind them too much, or unfortunately, some parents actually punish their child if they're doing these things, it creates a power struggle. And kids that are resistant or strong-willed are ones that are going to really thrive on a power struggle. Because we know kids can do 3 things that they can control us. One is using the bathroom. Another is eating when they choose to eat or what they choose to eat. And a third is sleeping when they choose to sleep. We can't force a child to do any of those things. And so it's one of those things that they can control us. So what you typically need to do is back off. I often tell parents for a child that's typically developing, that is a little bit older, that's doing this, is you need to just back away at least 2 weeks, stop all pressure, let them keep going, They might need to use a diaper for bathrooming, and that's okay. They've heard what you've said, but you need to let them take away the pressure. And there is actually some recommendations on the next page. If you have one of those strong-willed, resistant toilet trainers, the first thing you do is you transfer ownership of toilet training to the child. They are responsible for it. Most often, the kids that are doing this are kids that they understand what they're supposed to be doing, but they don't want to follow what you are telling them. They want to do it their own way. They want control. And so if you give them the ownership, you can have a conversation with them if they're able to have a conversation, and let them know that it's now their job, that you're not going to take care of it anymore, that they and just back away. Don't put pressure, don't be mean, be calm, and just let them know that this is their job. And then try really hard not to intervene. The second one is stop all reminders. Don't give them any reminders at all about going to the bathroom. And if they want to go to the bathroom and have you come with them, if they invite you, go ahead. Otherwise, let them do it on their own, because you want them to have that ownership of the bathroom duties. If you need to set up incentives, we already talked about a reward being very powerful, and it has to be an incentive that's only used for toileting and success at toileting. What is recommended, that especially because bowel movements can be such a problem with kids that are resistant, is making sure that you have like a really big reward system set for bowel movements in the bathroom, because that's the place where kids will withhold, and it causes a big problem with the structures of their intestinal tract, as well as backsliding. I mean, some kids who are the ones that withhold BMs end up with urinary tract infections and things that kind of are the secondary effect of it. We don't want that to happen. If you start off with a reward system that's pretty intense or has food related, you can later on adjust it to a reward chart of some sort. Again, that's powerful for the child, but you need to have some kind of incentive that's a positive behavior reinforcement. Quick access to the potty chair we talked about already. They do recommend at some point with these kids switching all the way to underwear, because again, they're responsible for what happens. They can feel the wetness. They can take care of that business when it's time. They say switch to underwear. And then the other thing they really, really strongly tell you do not remind them of anything other than if they have wet clothes or soiled clothes, you can give them a reminder they need to change their clothes, but let them be responsible for the rest. And then anyone within your system of managing your child, whether it's extended family, immediate family, if it's child care providers or anything else that's involved with their child, encourage everyone to be in the same system, because that consistency is so important, especially for a child that's resistant. So we want to make sure that things are pretty calm for them and that we don't put pressure, because pressure creates that power struggle. So they're the challenges. They are. It does happen that they get there eventually. It just takes time, and you have to really kind of back off. So then thinking about kids who have developmental delays. So those kids that might have just some pretty encompassing delays in development, or they might have a condition like Down syndrome or something similar to that you know that they have some difficulties. We need to consider what is their developmental age compared to their chronological age, because we know that chronologically they might be 7 years old, but developmentally they might be 18 months old or something in there in between. So we know that we can't even expect them to start toilet training until they at least are 18 months old developmentally. So keep that in mind with a child that has a developmental delay. I have a OT former coworker, who had a young man that we both knew when he was really young, and she saw him in the older years in school, because I did not see the older years. And he was one who was nearing 14 years old and still was not toilet trained, and he happened to have Down syndrome. And one day his mom was thrilled to contact my friend to tell her that he was being toilet trained. He finally had reached a developmental age that let him understand what needed to happen. And this mom had already resigned herself to the fact that he probably was not going to be trained at all, and was thrilled that he actually showed the interest. And then suddenly he was trained, but he was 14 years old. So sometimes it takes a long time, or it takes us a long time to get there, but it can happen for almost any child. We have to have the correct expectation, because we know going into toilet training for all kids that sometimes it takes a lot of time, and for some other kids it takes even a bigger amount of time, like this one. So just have that expectation in your mind. Be consistent, but be gentle. That firmness causes those other power struggles for any kid, and so we don't want to create that. For some kids with developmental delays, you have to take them in very small baby steps. The beginning point is just being comfortable sitting on a potty chair or a toilet, and doing it with clothes on to start with is the place where you have to start, and work towards doing it without the clothes on, and then focus directly on, are they urinating or doing the BM, and just that. Don't worry about the other pieces of the process. You're going to help them with those, so they just get the idea that that's connected with being on that toilet. And then your supports in the beginning for all kids, but especially kids with developmental delays, you front load a lot of support and guidance. You're going to give them a lot of help going through the process. And then as time goes on, and as they understand what they're doing more and more, and their body starts to really follow that same lead, then you can back away your support and phase it away. And that's what our goal is, that we eventually can take that support away completely and they can be independent. These are the kids that oftentimes that timing schedule works well with, especially if they're a little bit older. So just setting up that routine part of their day that they go to the bathroom, it kind of trains their bowel and bladder to go at those specific times, and that helps their body work best. So, and rewards are always helpful. So that's kids with developmental delays. Next is kids with physical disabilities. And this is kind of sometimes specific to the disability. And I've worked with lots of kids with disabilities. But having a disability does not mean you cannot be toilet trained, except for some unique situations. Like there are kids that have spina bifida that might have a high level of involvement, and they don't have the actual nerve control of their bowel and bladder. So they have to have a whole management system for doing that. That's done with support of urologists and gastrologists. So you need to have the right expectations. And so it can't, there are systems that can be put in place. They're not the same as other kids. Or some kids might have to have, or because of their size, equipment needs that will help them be safe in the bathroom. I've had kids that have had a type of muscular dystrophy that we had to use a mechanical lift to pick them up and put them on a toilet. They could be toilet trained, and they were. And they were able to tell me exactly what to do. And if I missed a step, they told me. But they could not get from point A to point B on their own. So they needed something to get themselves safely there and safe for the caregiver. So sometimes you have equipment that you need to use, or a special kind of toilet chair or an adaptation for that. So those things are available with the help of either a physiatrist or a PT or OT that can help you look at right equipment for specific needs on those kids. We know that kids that have these disabilities probably need more adult assistance in the beginning, especially, but maybe even all the way through. Because if they're not able to do transfers and get from point A to point B, they might need someone to do that with them, or to help manage their clothes, because some kids don't have the ability to pull pants up and down. Might need help for those pieces of it, but they can do the urine and BM part with that adult help. So that's what we want to work and focus on, and look towards that independence. So the next one is autism. So thinking about kids with autism, it's not the population that I've dealt with toilet training as much on. I was a support person more in the kids that had autism, but I do have coworkers who were the teachers of the classes that had great insight and worked hard with kids that had autism. I did learn at the DEC conference 2 years ago, I think, that Autism Alliance of Michigan has great supports for families of children with autism, and they actually can have someone help them toilet train their child. There may be a fee system that goes involved with that, but they have resources. So I've included a link to them about the services that are available for children with autism through Autism Alliance. There's a great resource. You can't see it, my background's blurred, but there's a resource that I found from U of M Mott about toilet training tips for kids with autism. So there's some things about the process and things to go, the great guidance for that. Autism Speak has its own training guide and there's many other sources. And I am not trained in the START model. I know that's a model that my program that I worked in, I had phased away from the kids with autism because I did the early intervention instead. But our district really used that model for everything, including toilet training. I'm not real familiar with that model, but if your district or your support people do that model, that has a very specific way of doing toilet training. So then a few key points with kids with autism. Consider those sensory needs, because we know kids have unique sensory needs that have autism, and you have to consider those components and how that's going to impact toilet training. Using picture cues, because the more we talk to kids with autism, sometimes the more they shut down. So using those picture cues, the visual schedule, the picture cards, and something to transition from point A to point B, because we know with all kids, leaving a fun activity or activity and stopping it to go to the bathroom sometimes is a problem. So using something that will support getting from point A to point B is helpful. So I know I used to use this for kids for all kinds of things in classrooms, a picture for the next thing they had to go to. So you could use a picture card for that. Constipation may need to be managed medically because we know that kids with autism often have a preferred diet that tends to be a little bit more binding. So that's something to have a conversation with the pediatrician about if that's a point, because we don't want to have a painful BM for any child, but especially a child that has a restricted diet. So you want to make sure that you can make sure that goes smoothly so that they can then have a comfortable BM, not a painful BM. So that's something that has to be managed somewhat with guidance by the pediatrician. And then collaborate and coordinate with all providers that are working with your child, whether it's the behavior people, ABA, school staff, whomever, so that you guys can be on the same page as well. So that's my little bit of information for autism. And then the one thing that I learned years ago, Judy Kokovanis, who used to be at U of M, now she's at a private clinic. She's still working. She wrote this book, and I had gone to her workshop years and years ago, specifically for a young man that I worked with who he had cerebral palsy, he had vision loss, he had cognitive deficits. He also was tube fed, and we didn't know, could he be toilet trained? And so I went to her workshop and learned a wealth of information and learned from her that he could be toilet trained. We worked hard on it. His family opted to give it up because it was challenging for them at home. So he ended up not doing it. But her comment to me about, like this child even, any child could be toilet trained given enough time and the right supports to be put in place. So she ended up writing a book. This book is kind of geared towards kids with special needs and autism, and it's got a bunch of humor in it. So it's really an easy read. It's very structured, tells you how to go through the process. It really is very helpful. And I always use it as a resource. And I actually have this book. So it's a great resource for kids that have some unique needs. And like I said, she's still around in a private clinic setting. You can always find her. She's worked with some families directly one-on-one for those challenging kids to toilet train as well. So love her, love the book, good information. A couple thoughts at the end. That wet and dry thing is important. Identify and label what's happening for your child so they know what it means. So they understand that when you urinate, that comes out of your body as part of the water coming out. Understanding what a bowel movement, how it feels different from the urine. Those body rhythms, use that diaper diary if you have to. Thinking about going in very small steps based on what's going on with the child, that you can go and start slow if you need to get to that process. And then having a meaningful reward system for your child if you're going to use one. It has to have something powerful for them that they really are charged up by. So one thing that always happens with everyone, excuse me a moment, all kids have accidents. So we have to make sure that we expect that's going to happen. Plan ahead. One of my resources that I looked up said, have a complete change of clothes. And I actually learned the hard way, even shoes, extra pair of shoes, because there are kids who will let it loose and it'll go down and their shoes will get soaking wet. And if you change their clothes but don't have extra shoes, they have shoes that are soaking wet. So giving a change of clothes readily available if you happen to have an accident. If they do have an accident, treat it very casually. Don't put much attention to it. Just take care of business, be done, because we know kids will repeat what they get attention for. We don't want it to be an accident. We don't want that to happen again. Stay calm and positive, and then try to, with every might that you've got, to avoid punishing, scolding, or shaming your child, because that is counterproductive for all kids. I mean, especially kids who are having a challenge. So please be really considerate of that as well. So that takes us to the end of my actual presentation. And I think I was right on time, Melanie. So I'm going to stop sharing